Welcome to this AQA GCSE Sociology Revision Blast. Today we are focusing on stratification and life chances, which is part of paper 2. We're going to start off today's revision blast with a round of altered vowels. So each of the key phrases that you will see have had the vowels changed to an alternative. You need to work out what the key phrases are, and they will all be linked to life chances in the stratification unit. Off we go. Our first one is on the screen for you. So we'll leave it up for a few moments. You need to try and work out what this word is. Okay, it is discrimination. So discrimination is all about treating people differently as a result of factors such as age, gender, race, sexual orientation, or ethnicity. Right, number 2. So we'll leave this one up on the screen for a moment. Can we see what this one is? Okay, let's have a look. It is institutional racism, where the institution and its policies and procedures are seen as racist. So, for example, the police have been accused of being institutionally racist on a number of occasions. Probably the most famous of this is the murder of Stephen Lawrence in 1993, where the report into that murder, so the Macpherson report, reached a shocking conclusion that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racism. So it wasn't just racism in the police, that the actual policies and procedures were racist themselves. Let's move on to the next one. So this one is a little bit easier, I think. Let's reveal. This is the gender pay gap, so the difference in salaries between men and women doing the same jobs, which shouldn't happen because of equal pay legislation, but it does. Number 4. Right, quite a tricky word here. Okay, have we worked this one out yet? So quite a hard one. Let's have a look. It is marginalisation, so where certain groups of people get denied access to areas of society. Let's move on. Okay, linked to this, and the concept of marginalisation, is this key term. Okay, let's have a look. It is social exclusion. So the idea there are groups of society that live on the fringes of society. So, for example, homeless people. So people that can't actually fully participate in everyday life. Okay, let's move on to a round of true or false. We have got 5 statements. You need to read them and decide whether they are correct or not. Our first one is ethnic minority groups are twice as likely to live in poverty than white people. Is this true or false? Let's reveal. It is true. Okay, number 2. An ethnicity pay gap exists between ethnic minority workers and white workers. Is this true or false? Okay, let's check. It is true. So around about 25% difference in pay there. Number 3. The Equal Pay Act means that men and women get paid the same. Is this true or false? Okay, let's reveal. It's false. They should get paid the same, but they don't. Number 4. Less than half of adults with disabilities are in paid employment. Is this true or false? It is true. So unfortunately, half of adults with disabilities are not able to work because of all sorts of issues around not providing accessible workspaces, making assumptions about the abilities of people with disabilities, all sorts of things. And our last true or false statement is It is impossible to live in poverty if you are in paid employment. Is this true or false? It is, of course, false. So the minimum wage has been in place in the UK for a number of years now to try and ensure that people are getting a decent amount of money for work. But the minimum wage is still very low, and most people working on the minimum wage will really struggle to pay their bills. Lots and lots of people are living in poverty, even if they are in full-time work, and even if they are now earning a reasonable salary, because cost of living expenses have gone up and up and up over the last few years, particularly in the last year. So we have got interest rates going up, meaning that mortgage repayments are higher and higher. We've got the cost of energy, we've got the cost of food. All of these things are actually putting more and more people in poverty that previously lived relatively comfortably. We're now going to move on to a round of 30-second challenge, which we're going to do 4 times. So our first question is, how does ethnicity affect life chances? You've got 30 seconds to note down some answers. Off you go. Okay, let's have a look at what you could have noted down. So, subject to racism and institutional racism, they're more likely to live in poverty and have worse health. So, for example, Black and Asian minority ethnic people were disproportionately affected by COVID. People who are part of ethnic minorities are 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed, and there is that ethnicity pay gap with Black workers paid 23% less on average. Right, next one. 30 seconds to answer this question. How does sexuality affect life chances? Okay, let's have a look. So, subject to homophobic behaviour, heterosexuality is presented as the norm. There's discrimination, so there are less rights to marry. There might be issues around adoption. You've got a few openly gay sports people, so less gay role models. And half of transgender people don't live as their preferred gender for fear of losing their job. Right, 30 seconds to answer. How does disability affect life chances? Okay, let's reveal. We've got negative attitudes based on stereotypes, seen as less valuable to society. Lots of assumptions are made about the ability to work, to have children, to live independently, etc. Local services don't always support physical disability. So, for example, shops and buses. And disability can often be viewed as a personal tragedy. So, something that's happened to a person which is really negative. And our last 60-second challenge is, how does age affect life chances? Okay, let's see the answers. So we have stereotypes, so young people might be seen as lazy and naive, maybe even a threat to society, whereas older people are seen as set in their ways, grumpy, etc. Older people tend to lose their importance as well, so they're seen as a burden and no longer economically valuable. And over 50s often get overlooked for jobs, so there is a massive age discrimination in recruitment. Right, our last activity in the revision blast is a big one. So we have the question grid. We've got 9 questions. We're going to go through these together. So we're going to start off with question 1. What is the voting age in the UK? So we'll leave it up on the screen for a few moments. You need to note down what the voting age in the UK is, and then think about how this links to the idea of life chances and discrimination. Let's reveal. It is 18 years old. So this was a real sticking point around the Brexit vote. Particularly, there's lots of people campaigning at the time to give 16-year-olds a right to vote, saying that this group of people knew enough about politics and were, really well informed and interested in current issues, and should have a right to vote on something that was really important for their future. Particularly when you look down the breakdown at the Brexit vote, where if you look at the age groups, people that were much older were much more likely to vote for Brexit without really much thought about how it impacted younger people. So obviously, if we think about how it has impacted younger people, we've got a really good example of less likely to be able to study abroad than you would have done a few years ago. So at the end of the Erasmus scheme, for example. Right, number 2. What does childhood being a social construct mean? So think about that term, childhood being a social construct. What do we mean by that? So just take a moment, have a think. If you need to pause the video, please do. Okay, let's reveal the answer. So the concept of childhood varies over time and place. So if we think about childhood in the UK, it is generally seen as a time period where we protect those young people. So it's a time of nurture, looking after young children, protecting them from the world. If we go to other countries, we might have children as young as 8 or 9 fighting as child soldiers. So it really varies where we are. And it also varies over time. So if we go back a few generations as well, if we think about sort of pre-war, then we had children largely going out to work, not necessarily going to school. And certainly it wasn't really until the 1960s and 70s where children left school where most children would leave school with qualifications. So it was really common then, even then, to be leaving school at 14 and be working full time. Number 3, what is the crisis of masculinity? So think about that term there in inverted commas, the crisis of masculinity. What do we mean by this? So pause the video if you need to, if you want to try and answer this, maybe write a couple of sentences about it. So let's reveal. It is where men are struggling with the professional and personal demands of them placed in society. There are lots of reasons for this. One of them is down to the fact that women are much more independent than they used to be. So women don't rely on men so heavily. Men perhaps feel a little bit less useful. But you've also got the decline of traditional roles. So deindustrialization in the 1980s meant that lots of factory work and jobs like dockers and miners stopped existing in the UK, or existed in a much smaller numbers, whereas in sort of the 60s and 70s and early 80s, lots of boys would have gone through schools knowing that when they left school, they didn't necessarily need to have qualifications because they were going to go into these roles and these were going to be jobs for life. And they're not there anymore. So there is a whole group of men struggling with kind of what their role is. So what is their professional role? Because these traditional roles that were very masculine don't really exist anymore. Right, number 4, what is prejudice? So think about that key term that we should be really aware of as part of the specification. What is prejudice? So pause if you need a bit more time. Let's reveal the answer. It is prejudging, as it sounds. So you're making an assumption without any knowledge. So many bosses might assume that a woman's main priority is to get married and have children. Therefore, she would get passed over for a promotion. And it might even be that in a job interview, if you had two good candidates, one male, one female, you might decide to employ the male instead because he's less likely to need time off in the future for childcare or to go on maternity leave. So it is making these prejudgments. And for all, the person conducting that interview knows nothing about that woman. She may have no plans at any point to have children, but there's lots of assumptions made about that, and assumptions again about people with disabilities, about what they can and they can't do. So you might not want to employ somebody with a disability because again you fear their health may get in the way of the job without any knowledge about what issues they may have. Number 5, what is social exclusion? So we did come across this in one of our earlier activities. What is social exclusion? Okay, let's have a look. So it's where a group of people can't participate fully in society. So we used the example of homeless people earlier. Travellers are another group that don't participate fully in society because of the nature of the lifestyle that they live. They kind of live on the fringes of society, meaning that children in travellers' families, for example, find it quite difficult to access education because they're constantly on the move. Number 6, what is the difference between race and ethnicity? So those words are quite often confused, but they do have a different meaning. What do we mean by race? What do we mean by ethnicity? Okay, let's reveal. So race implies humans are split into different groups based on biology, whereas ethnicity is all about the cultural group a person belongs to. And it might include their religion, it might include their nationality, and it might include their way of life, but it is not just about skin colour. Number 7, what is the glass ceiling? It's to do with women and work, but what do we mean by the glass ceiling? So pause the video if you want to have a think about this one for a moment. Okay, let's have a look. It is when women can see the top jobs, but they can't get to them because it's linked to gender discrimination. And we'll talk about discrimination a bit more in a minute. Number 8, what is marginalisation? So again, pause the video if you want to note down a proper answer to this one. What is marginalisation? Let's reveal. The non-inclusive positioning of some groups on the edge of society. So obviously it links in with social exclusion. And then what do we mean by discrimination? What does that term actually mean? We've already had a definition for prejudice in box number 4, but what is discrimination? They tend to go together. Okay, let's reveal. So it's when prejudice turns into action. So you're treating someone in an unjust or unfair way because of perceived social differences. Okay, well done if you got all of those correct. And well done for getting to the end of the revision blast on stratification and life chances. We have recapped some key information there through a variety of different activities, and hopefully that will enable you to go into your paper 2 exam feeling much more confident. If you haven't already checked out the Revision Blast playlist, do have a look because we have got videos for every topic, and we've also got some cross-topic concepts covered as well. And the last thing from me is just to wish you the very best of luck in your 2 exams.